At first glance, Eldridge was charming, almost enchanting, but I soon learned that beneath his picturesque facade lay a disturbing legend that had been whispered about for generations. The townspeople would often speak in hushed, almost reverent tones about something they referred to as the midnight vanishings. According to the legend, at the stroke of midnight, individuals would occasionally disappear without a trace, as if they had never existed. Being a 17-year-old with a natural inclination towards skepticism, I found these stories amusing rather than alarming. I dismissed them as nothing more than superstitious folklore, the kind that every small town seemed to have. However, my curiosity was piqued. I wanted to understand why this legend held such sway over the town's consciousness. As days turned into weeks, I found myself increasingly drawn to the stories of the midnight vanishings. I would listen intently as the locals recounted tales of friends and relatives who had supposedly vanished at midnight, leaving behind nothing but an eerie silence and a lingering sense of dread. Each story was different, yet they all shared a common thread: the mysterious disappearances always happened when the town clock struck 12. Despite my initial skepticism, a part of me couldn't help but be intrigued by these tales. There was a tantalizing mystery at the heart of Eldridge, and I was determined to unravel it. Little did I know that my curiosity would soon lead me down a path of chilling discoveries and unspeakable horrors, forever altering my perception of reality. It was a chilly October evening, the kind where the wind whispered secrets through the branches, and the moon cast a ghostly glow over the world. I remember sitting in my room, staring out the window at the clock tower that loomed in the distance. The hands of the clock were inching closer to midnight, and a sense of anticipation mixed with a hint of fear churned in my stomach. I wasn't sure what I expected to happen, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was about to witness something extraordinary. As the clock began its final chime, signaling the arrival of midnight, I noticed my neighbor, Mr. Thompson, walking his dog across the street. He was a regular sight in the neighborhood, always out for his late-night stroll. I watched, half expecting him to vanish into thin air like the story suggested. To my surprise, and somewhat disappointment, nothing happened. Mr. Thompson and his dog continued their walk, oblivious to the legend that had kept me captivated. Just as I was about to write off the entire legend as nothing but an elaborate hoax, it happened. In the blink of an eye, Mr. Thompson disappeared. One moment he was there, and the next, he was gone, as if he had been erased from existence. His dog, now ownerless, let out a confused whine and ran off into the night. I was stunned, my mind struggling to comprehend what I had just seen. Questions flooded my thoughts. Had I imagined it? Was it some trick of the light? Or had I just witnessed one of the midnight vanishings? The incident sparked a burning obsession within me. I needed answers. I needed to know what was happening in Eldridge and why. My skepticism had been shattered, replaced by a desperate need to uncover the truth behind the midnight vanishings. In the days that followed, I began my investigation. I spent hours at the local library, poring over old newspapers and town records, searching for any clue that could shed light on the disappearances. I spoke to long-time residents, hoping they would reveal details that had been left out of the public stories. Each piece of information added to the growing puzzle, painting a picture of a town haunted by an unexplained phenomenon for decades. But as I delved deeper into the mystery, strange things began to happen. I would often feel like I was being watched, catching glimpses of shadowy figures that vanished when I turned to look. My friends started acting oddly around me, as if they were hiding something. The more I investigated, the more I felt like I was unraveling a thread that should have remained untouched. The unsettling events that followed my witness of Mr. Thompson's disappearance only served to deepen my resolve. I could feel the fabric of normalcy in Eldridge unraveling, revealing a sinister underbelly. My investigation took on a frenetic pace, driven by a mix of fear and fascination. The town's archives became my refuge, a place where I sought answers among dusty files and forgotten records. I uncovered a pattern in the vanishings. They occurred sporadically over decades, with no apparent connection between the victims. They were from different walks of life, of varying ages, but all shared the same fate: disappearing at the stroke of midnight. My conversations with the townspeople turned from casual inquiries to intense interrogations. I spoke to Mrs. Ellery, whose husband had vanished 30 years ago. She described a similar sense of sudden loss, and the unnerving silence that followed. Her eyes, clouded with years of unshed tears, told a story of unresolved grief and unanswerable questions. As I pieced together the history of the midnight vanishings, my own life in Eldridge started to fray at the edges. I began receiving ominous notes, warning me to stop my investigation. My house would sometimes shake with unexplained tremors in the dead of night. I would wake up to find objects in my room subtly moved, as if someone had been rummaging through my things. The more I discovered, the more isolated I felt. My friends distanced themselves, whispering behind closed doors. I noticed strangers watching me from shadowed corners, their gazes heavy with unspoken threats. The idyllic facade of Eldridge had slipped, revealing a community bound by a dark secret and a collective fear. Despite the growing danger, I couldn't stop. I was too close to the truth, or so I believed. I had to know what was behind the midnight vanishings, even if it meant putting myself in harm's way. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to uncover on the fateful night I decided to confront the mystery head-on. The night I chose to face the truth was shrouded in a thick impenetrable fog that seemed to emerge from the very depths of Eldridge's darkest corners. With a heart pounding in my chest and a flashlight as my only companion, I made my way to the town square. The ancient clock tower loomed above me, its face a ghostly sentinel counting down to midnight. I found a hidden spot near the base of the tower, my eyes fixed on the clock's hands as they inched closer to the fateful hour. The town was eerily silent, as if it held its breath in anticipation. Midnight. Then, as the final chime echoed through the square, it happened. The air around me grew colder, and the fog thickened into an almost tangible presence. From within the swirling mists, a form began to materialize. It was an entity unlike anything I had ever seen or could have imagined, a swirling mass of shadows and whispers, its form constantly shifting and changing. Paralyzed with both fear and awe, I watched as the entity hovered near the clock tower. It seemed to be searching, its form pulsating with a sinister energy. Then, as if sensing my presence, it turned towards me. For a moment that felt like an eternity, we were locked in a gaze that transcended the physical realm. I felt an overwhelming urge to flee, but my body refused to obey. The entity moved closer, and I could hear the faint whispers emanating from it, voices of those it had taken, calling out from a place beyond understanding. In that moment, I understood the true horror of the midnight vanishings. This entity was not just a taker of lives, but a collector of souls, trapping them in an eternal twilight. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I broke free from my trance and ran. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, not daring to look back. The entity did not pursue me, perhaps it was bound to the clock tower, or perhaps it simply chose to let me go. I made it back to my house, my mind reeling from the encounter. I knew then that the truth of the midnight vanishings was far more terrifying than any legend or rumor. The entity was real, and it was the keeper of Eldridge's darkest secret. In the days that followed, I was consumed by a mix of fear and obsession. I had come face to face with the unknown, and it had changed me. I could no longer view the world as I once had. Eldridge, with its quaint streets and secretive residents, was no longer just a town. It was a prison for lost souls, guarded by an unspeakable horror. The aftermath of my encounter with the entity was a blur of sleepless nights and haunted days. I was a changed person, carrying the weight of a terrifying secret that I could share with no one. The townspeople of Eldridge seemed to sense the change in me. Their once friendly faces now bore looks of wariness and, at times, outright hostility. In the days that followed, my life in Eldridge became increasingly isolated. My friends, who once welcomed me with open arms, now avoided me, their eyes darting away whenever I tried to meet their gaze. It was as if they knew I had uncovered the dark heart of the town's legend, and wanted nothing to do with the truth I had discovered. I tried to go about my daily life, but the shadow of the entity loomed over every moment. The town itself seemed to be closing in on me, the quaint streets and picturesque houses now feeling more like a carefully constructed facade, hiding a malevolent presence. The whispers in the night grew louder, and I often felt a chilling sensation, as if unseen eyes were watching me from the darkness. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. The knowledge of the entity and the real story behind the midnight vanishings was too much to bear. I contemplated leaving Eldridge, escaping the nightmare that my life had become. But a part of me was reluctant to turn my back on the mystery. The entity had spared me for a reason, and I felt a responsibility to those who had vanished, to tell their story, to expose the truth. However, the town seemed to have other plans. My attempts to discuss my experience or further investigate were met with stern warnings and thinly veiled threats. It became clear that the townspeople were determined to keep the secret of the midnight vanishings, no matter the cost. Caught between the desire to reveal the truth and the need to protect myself, I found myself at a crossroads. The one simple life I had known in Eldridge was gone, replaced by a reality where nightmares walked at midnight, and truths were buried in shadows. I had to make a choice, one that would either plunge me deeper into the abyss or allow me to escape the clutches of the town's dark legacy. The decision to leave Eldridge came to me during a restless night, where the moon hung low in the sky, casting long, ominous shadows across my room. The weight of the secrets I carried had become too much to bear, and the sense of danger that hung over me was suffocating. I realized that staying in Eldridge would mean living in perpetual fear, with a heavy heart, I packed my belongings, leaving behind the life I had begun to build in this strange, haunted town. As I drove away from Eldridge, I watched in the rearview mirror as the town disappeared into the distance, shrouded in the early morning mist. It felt like waking from a long, disturbing dream. Yet, even as I put miles between myself and Eldridge, I knew that the story of the midnight vanishings would never truly leave me. The memories of what I had seen and learned lingered in my mind, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurk in the unseen corners of the world. I made a silent vow to keep the secret of the midnight vanishings, to protect others from the terrifying truth. The entity and the souls it had claimed were bound to Eldridge, and I hoped that by leaving, I could distance myself from the darkness. However, the resolution I sought was not to be. In the days that followed my departure from Eldridge, I found myself looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, and waking from dreams filled with whispers and fading faces. The fear that had gripped me in Eldridge had followed me, a persistent reminder of the night I had encountered the entity. The story of the midnight vanishings remained with me, an unresolved chapter in my life. I wondered about the fate of those who had disappeared, and whether the entities still roamed the streets of Eldridge when the clock struck midnight. The truth was out there, hidden in the fog and shadows, but it was a truth that was too dangerous to pursue. As I settled into my new life, far from the haunting confines of Eldridge, I realized that some mysteries are best left unsolved. The entity, the vanishings, and the town itself were part of a darker reality that defied understanding. And so, I carried on, the memories of Eldridge a ghostly echo in the back of my mind, a chilling tale of a town where, when the clock strikes midnight, people disappear.